Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So I'm here to do my June wrap up, which is July now, it's almost the end of July, but I'm doing my June wrap up, because of course I am. So June I read 23 books, which is really good. Like, that's me back on my reading track and beyond, really. So I'm super happy I did that. And 12 of those books were arcs, which is even better. So I don't know what order anything's going to go in because I've just not been uploading, but I already have a June mid-month wrap-up up, which I'll link down below, so that's like the first 10 or something books I read. I have a Galleathon wrap-up, which is a bunch of arcs I read in 1 week as part of Galleathon, which is a readathon, and then there's this wrap-up, and then that encompasses all of the books I've read in June. So as a quick overview of the 23 books I read, I had 2 2-star, 2 2.5 star, 5 3-star, 2 3.5 star, 5 4-star, 3 4.5 star, and 3 5-star. So a whole range of scores, a whole range of things I read this month. And I'm going to start talking about the books because, as always, there's a lot to get through. First book of this video is The Birds, the Bees, You and Me by Olivia Hinebaugh. Let me just turn up the brightness so you can see that cover. There we go. This I really wanted to like more than I did. This was my 2.5 star read, or a 2.5 star read. This is about a girl called Lacey, and basically the idea that the blurb says that what happens is at Lacey's school they stop doing proper sex education, and she's got a nurse for a mother, so she knows like everything to do about sex even though she's never had it, and she starts doing her own informal sex ed. That's what the blurb says, and that is part of the book, and I was really into that part of the book, but it's not the main part of the book. The main part of the book is actually a romance, and our 3 main characters are Lacey, Evita, I think, and Theo, and they've been best friends for ages. Evita and Theo used to date, and then Theo's got a new girlfriend now, and there's still like a lot of weird, like Evita's very passive aggressive towards Theo, that kind of thing. And then Lacey develops a crush on Theo and they start going out, and that's really where the book went downhill for me. So let me tell you something about Theo. Theo is controlling, Theo is secretive, Theo does not want Lacey to pursue her own dreams and go to the college she wants to go to. He wants her to go to the same college he goes to. And at the start of the book I thought they had this really great friendship, and I got really excited because it was a male-female friendship which was like physically affectionate, and you don't really see those a lot, and I have a lot of those in my life. It's like completely platonic, but like we hug and everything. Not everything, you know, we hug, we have physical contact of a non-sexual nature. And I was like, oh yeah, excellent, I'm actually going to read about a friendship like this. And then it turns out, of course, they secretly are in love with each other. And I was like, okay, that's what's going to happen in this book. But I just kept waiting for the narrative to point out how bad their relationship was, and it never did. And I just had this awful feeling throughout. Like, I didn't trust Theo. And clearly I wasn't intended to have that feeling, but I did. It was quite strong, and it kind of ruined that part of the book, which was a large part of the book. Evita is asexual. She was a great character to read about. She was such a good friend to everyone. Apart from being a little passive aggressive towards Theo and his new girlfriend, like I loved her. She was the best character by far. And all of the sexual health stuff is handled really well. It's a bit on the nose, but I don't mind that in a book like this because it's aimed at teenagers and it is the point of the book. There's a lot of characters having very frank conversations about sex ed, and it's a little bit preachy, but there's also a lot of self-awareness. Like at some points characters will be like, okay, you can stop talking about sex ed now. The main character will be like, oh sorry, you know. It felt very realistic. So that part was good. The romance ruined it, and it was such a bad romance. And it made me real sad, so I wish I'd liked that more than I had because I'm really into the concept of it, but I did not, sadly. The next book was also a 2.5 star read, and that is White Rabbit by Caleb Roehrig. I think that's how you say it. I was super excited to read this book. This is a young adult thriller, and again the blurb says it's about this guy, he's the mate, I can't remember anyone's name at this point, but main character, he's gay, and he his sister, he finds his sister like over her dead boyfriend, and basically they're trying to find out who killed him to clear her name before the police get involved. And it's the main guy and his, I can't remember if he's his ex-boyfriend or just someone he had a crush on, I can't quite remember the details, but I was like, cool, solid young adult thriller, sounds good. This book at no point mentions, so it's called White Rabbit, and maybe this is my ignorance to drugs, but that is a drug in the book, and the entire thriller aspect comes from like the drug dealing. Like the guy who died was a drug dealer, and he was a known drug dealer, and that's kind of presumed to be the reason why he died. And a large portion of the plot, in fact all of the plot, is just focused around this drug dealing aspect, which I'm not into. I don't really care. Like, that's not something I look for in my thrillers. I don't really, wasn't enough to drive the plot for me. It didn't appeal to me in any way. So I actually pretty much DNF'd this. I skim read it, skipped to the end, and yeah, I just wished that the drug aspect had been mentioned somewhere on the blurb, because I wouldn't have bothered picking this up if I'd known that was the case. But I did not know, so alas, I just started reading a book that wasn't for me. Now I get to be a bit more positive with Hydra by Matt Wesolowski. You'll never be able to see this cover. This is the sequel to 6 Stories, and I listened to this as an audiobook. This was a 4-star read for me. It is, if you don't know, 6 Stories is basically a, I don't know if you can hear those seagulls, they're so loud. I'm nowhere near the sea, it's loads of seagulls. Anyway, so 6 Stories is like a podcast style book / audiobook where this guy runs this podcast called 6 Stories. He finds an unsolved case, he finds 6 people relating to that, and he interviews them one by one. He doesn't try to solve the case, he just kind of presents some facts. I really, really enjoyed 6 Stories. This is a sequel, it's the same premise but completely different story. This one is about a young girl called Alma, who, I say young girl, she's like 20, and when she was 20 she supposedly massacred her entire family, and she is currently incarcerated for that. And there's some debate because around her story there's like some supernatural elements involved, and that's kind of all I can really say without giving it away. So yeah, this is a 4-star read. I really enjoyed it. This is worse than 6 Stories, and the reason for that is the resolution. I won't go into any details, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it kind of felt like a lot of it didn't matter. It felt like a lot of it was padding, which is kind of concerning in a book like this. And podcast element was done fantastically again. I really like these as audiobooks. I actually own the other 2 now as well. I think a new one just came out. Just because they're so nice to listen to on audiobook. Similar reason to why Sadie is so popular, because it's just like narrated like a podcast. It's really entertaining and everyone's got different voices. It's really good. So that aspect was great. It was just the plot that let it down, and the ending, and it was kind of not as satisfactory as 6 Stories. But I still really enjoyed it, and I would still definitely recommend it. So the next book I read was another 4-star read, and that is The Folcroft Ghosts by Darcy Coates. So I love Darcy Coates. She's one of my favourite underrated horror authors. I think most of her stuff is on Kindle Unlimited. Particularly recommend Small Horrors, I think is what it's called. It's a short story collection of super short horror stories, and they're all great. This I thought was a full-length novel. It's kind of more like a novella, and then there's a couple of short stories after it, which I didn't realise or had forgotten when I requested the ARC. This is an ARC, so there'll be a full blog review down below, linked in the description, if you want more detail than I'm going to give you now. But yeah, so I forgot that aspect, so I'm mostly going to just talk about the main story, which is the Folcroft Ghosts. This was right up my street. This is basically Goosebumps for a slightly older audience, and I mean that 100% as a compliment. It's got a lot of elements of like traditional Goosebumps stories. It's got these 2 siblings. Their mother gets into a car crash and goes into a coma, so they get sent to live with their grandparents, and their grandparents live in this really creepy old house. There's like ghost stuff going on, and their grandparents are super weird. They don't really act like normal people. There's like a mysterious nearby town, and basically a whole bunch of horror tropes, but in a good way. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I love her writing. It's got a really unique tone to it, and I really appreciate that. And this story was just like, it was just a lot of fun. It was really good to read. One thing that I really do commend the story for is that it's your basic like haunted house story, but it's not. I couldn't predict where it was going to go, and I really like that in a haunted house story, because, you know, they've been done to death. I read a lot of them. It's one of my favourite tropes, and if it's unpredictable, that's just such an achievement in my eyes, to make a haunted house story unpredictable. So yeah, I don't really have much more else to say about this one. If you like that kind of, I don't want to say goofy horror because it's not quite goofy, but the kind of like very traditional horror that's a lot of fun to read and is quite interesting and creepy, I definitely recommend this book, and I definitely recommend to other stuff as well because it's really good. The next book I read was Whodunit by a whole bunch of authors. This is going to be real quick. This was a 3-star read and it was pretty much a DNF. Read the Goodreads reviews for this, because basically this is supposed to be it's like a writing exercise. So there's a whole bunch of famous authors in this. There's like John Green, Gail Forman, Lemony Snicket, Libba Bray, a whole bunch of famous people. And basically the whole premise for this anthology is that all of these authors are writing as themselves, and they've all been sent on a writing conference with this guy who is, I think he's an editor or something, or a publishing house guy, I don't know, can't remember his role, but he's like the most unpleasant guy ever, and he's just been murdered. And the stories are meant to be like the police interviewing each of the authors and them giving an alibi. This is not a mystery you can solve in any way. That's not what this book is about, which, like, I'd read the Goodreads review and that's what they say, but I didn't believe them, and I wish I had. So believe your Goodreads reviews, because I did not. This got really old really fast. All the stories are super repetitive. I don't think you can read this from start to finish. Like, I don't know if anyone could do that. I think you just have to kind of pick the authors that you like and read their little segments. It was entertaining enough. It was just, it's such a good idea, but it's executed so badly. I don't want to be too harsh for this book because it was sold for charity, and I think that's a big reason why it exists. It has entertaining moments, but yeah, it's just not really worth it, to be honest with you. So this next book is going to be fun for me to talk about. I read Pinkvilla by Olivia O'Neill. This was another arc I requested. This was a 2-star read. I'm just going to flat out say it now. This is erotica. I did not know this was erotica. I don't typically read erotica. It is partially my fault because it is labelled as erotica on NetGalley. I just didn't see that. It is, however, partially not my fault because it is also compared to several other books, and it's compared to thrillers. And this is basically about a woman who goes on holiday with a wealthy family as their nanny / housekeeper type person, and it's described on the blurb as she gets sucked into their world, and you know, it's like she gets swept up in all the glamour, and that's the aspect I was interested in because I love stories like that, especially with like a dark thrillery angle. This book is essentially porn without any plot. Like, she arrives at the villa and immediately starts having sex with like 4 different people, and that's pretty much the entire book. So I'm not, like, the low score is not just because this is erotica and I don't like erotica. This low score is because of several factors. It is because it was mismarketed, because it is played up as having this huge twist at the end, like several of the books it's compared to have huge twists, and there is something which I hope wasn't meant to be a twist because it's really weak, but if it was meant to be a twist then it's really bad. And it's not even remotely a thriller. So the mismarketing does come into it. The other thing is that there is no plot, like I said. It is endless sex scenes, and it's kind of weird. Like, I could get into, like, I could have read this and enjoyed it, shall we say, from an erotica point of view, but because of the way that the sex scenes are, they're so repetitive and so continuous that you start to like dissociate from it, and it's really hard to keep finding it appealing when it's just like meat. I don't know how else to put that. There's also a couple of really funny quotes, like I at one point, a couple of points actually, it's repeated several times, the main guy says, come over here and bring your breasts with you, which I just thought was really funny because I like the mental image of her being able to leave her breasts behind. Like, I get that it's meant to be like a powerful, you know, oh, I'm gonna boss you about kind of thing, but it was just so weird and surreal that I just found it really funny. That's probably personal taste. But yeah, and there's also has some problematic elements in it. It is implied that the reason the main character loves sex so much is because she was abused as a teenage girl, and that's really weird. I don't know why that's in the story, to be honest with you. And yeah, it's just, that was the main problematic thing. And the other thing is sort of a spoiler, but there's like, I'm going to spoil it anyway. I'll put my hand up in case you care about the plot of this book. But essentially, it implies she is, like, a sex scene turns into rape. But narratively, there's nothing to distinguish it from the other sex scenes. And it's just handled so poorly that it just feels like it was added for drama. And then the main character immediately has consensual sex afterwards anyway. And that in itself could be written and make sense, but it's not written in this and makes sense. So I'm not objecting to the content per se, so much as to the way it's done. But yeah. So that was that book, and that was fun to read, surprise erotica. So yeah, that spiced up my June. So the next book I read was The Weekend Away by Sarah Alderson. This is a thriller, this is another arc, and I gave this 3.5 stars. This is about a woman named Orla, and she goes away to Lisbon with her best friend Kate. They always go away together on weekends, and they haven't done it for a couple of years because Orla's now got a baby and a husband and all that kind of thing. But they decide to go on this weekend away, and it turns out Kate has more of a wild weekend in mind than Orla intended. They go out clubbing, and various things happen, and then when Orla wakes up the next day, Kate is missing. That's kind of the basic premise for the thriller. I really liked this. This is really enjoyable. This is a great summer type thriller. It's got a lot of summer imagery, a lot of fun things kind of going on until all the thrillery stuff happens. This thriller's got a lot of good stuff going on. It's got like nice characters. The main character doesn't act like an idiot, which I appreciate. And it's got like quite a nice setting and story. My main problem with it is it's very linear. It was fine, it was well written in terms of the style and the characters and all that kind of thing, but the plot itself was very straightforward. It didn't really surprise me at any point, and I didn't feel particularly shocked by anything that happened, which was slightly a shame. But this is still a great thriller. It sounds like I'm downplaying it now, like I would encourage you to read it. It's better than a lot of holiday type thrillers that I've read before. It's just that if you want thrillers with a huge punch and like lots of shocks and surprises, this isn't going to do it for you. But as like a thriller to take away or read out in your garden in the sun, because we're all in lockdown, this is pretty decent. It's got some nice elements going on. I feel like this author could do a lot better if she had a stronger plot. And I look forward, I think she's actually already done quite a lot of books, but I hope that she manages to like find a really good thriller plot, because I feel like she could do a lot more than she did with this book. It mainly suffers as well because at some point all of the characters are portrayed as being like creepy or suspicious, which is a standard thriller tactic, but it means that you can't really be surprised when any of them turn out to have done something creepy or suspicious, because you're like, well, yeah, they were acting creepy and suspicious, so yeah, it was just a shame. The next book I read was a bit of an impulse read. It was Circe Berserk by Jessica Guest. This is a horror book, and this is on Kindle Unlimited, so you can get it, and I recommend you do, because I gave it 4 stars. So this is about, basically there was a bunch of slaughters at this carnival / fun fair, and these kids return there, these teenagers go there to kind of investigate this carnival / fun fair. And I feel that's all I can say without spoiling it, and that's so little to go on, but it's a pretty short book. This is really interesting from a horror perspective. It actually has a strong romance subplot, which I wasn't expecting, and actually was done quite well, unlike most horror books. And the weird thing is, I can't say about this book is annoying. So I will say the start of this book is the worst part of it. It dumps a whole lot of characters on you and a whole lot of points of view. And it reads a bit like a list, like it introduces one character and then goes through the next one. And I almost DNF'd it because of that, and I'm glad I didn't, because then something happens and it's changes what type of story it is. You also get the point of view of the killers quite a lot, and it was interesting. It almost winds up being their story more than anyone else's, and I think that was kind of cool. So yeah, if you like this is like slasher horror, so if you like Kill River, anything along those lines, this is another really great addition to that. It's also got fairly decent representation if you're looking for more diverse horror, and I'm intrigued because I think it's one of a series, but it stood alone as I think they're all standalones in terms of plot. I think it's just like a theme that's linking them together or something. I'd be interested to read the other ones in the series, and I think, especially because it's on Kindle Unlimited, this is definitely worth checking out if you're a horror fan. And the final book, I hate to end on another downer, but this was a 2-star read as well. Yeah, this was a 2-star read, and it was The Deep by Alma Katsu. So this is a horror book. It's a historical horror book about the Titanic, and the basic plot is there is this woman who was on the Titanic when it sank, and then 4 years later she is on the sister boat of the Titanic or something similar, and she sees someone she knows for a fact died on the Titanic on this sister ship, and that's kind of like the basic premise. This is told in 2 timelines, and it got very confusing for me because I could not follow what was happening in each timeline. I genuinely don't think this should have been told the way it was told. So the bulk of this book is set on the Titanic. It is the story about what happened on the Titanic, and very little of it happens in the present day, and I don't understand why this wasn't just written about the Titanic. Like, the way the blurb is written makes it sound like the emphasis is going to be on her in the present day, and this man she meets who she knows died, and that sounds like, well, that's where the horror's going to come from, and that's not the case. It is just more like a framing device than anything else, and it's kind of ruins the flow of the story, especially when it switches between them and you're kind of like, wait, which character was this? What boat am I on? What is she doing with her life? So that threw me. The other thing is that there are very few horror elements in this at all. Like, it's a stretch to call this any kind of horror book. There's some atmospheric stuff, but really it's just a historical fiction book, and the horror is barely a presence, which I was not a fan of. So that was very disappointing for me, and I kept waiting for the horror to become actually part of the plot, and it never really did, which was a shame. I will say again, narratively, this was really well written in terms of the style and in terms of characters. I liked the characters, but it was just, yeah, it's just the fact there was almost no horror, and that the modern day plotline was basically inconsequential and didn't need to be in the book, and just made it more confusing. So sadly, this was not for me. Maybe if you like historical fiction more than I do, you will enjoy this more, but it is not a horror book, at least in my eyes. So yeah, so those are all of the books I read in June. I feel like I started on a negative and ended on a negative, which was not my intention, but it's just the chronological way it was. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts on any of the stuff I've said, or like you think any of them sound cool, or you don't think they sound good, or just whatever you want to comment down below, please do. I always like talking to people. I say like I'm good at responding to comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively, and I hope to see you next time.